Mornings on SuperTalk Mississippi. Dave Hughes here. And we are joined now by our old friend here on the network, the president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, Douglas Carswell, joins us. How are you doing this morning, Douglas?
Good morning, Dave. Good morning, Mississippi. It's great to be here.
It's always great to have you here. Now, let me just start with a fairly open-ended question, but I want your take on this. What in the heck's going on at the Capitol?
Good question. Good question. I think it's fair to sum up the session in two ways. It's first of all been quite frustrating. And we saw a press release from the Speaker that went out yesterday, and I think that reflected some of the frustration. Some of the pro-growth agenda that he and others have come up with has been blocked. Now, some of it's gotten through. We've had this extraordinary tax reform, which means we're going to phase out the income tax over the next 10 years. Great news for making Mississippi more competitive. But it's been frustrating. So many of the other things that we could have done have been blocked. And I think this is the second story of the session. There are now clearly two very contrasting styles. You've got the pro-growth, pro-reform House behind the Speaker. And then you've got the forces of the status quo, the Senate, who, under the current leadership, want to do politics very differently. They come not with a plan for pro-growth. They come armed with a few cryptic interviews that don't really say what they believe. They come prepared to do backroom deals at the last minute. They come with no plan. They come intent upon killing pro-growth policies in committee. And I think what we've seen in this session is the two contrasting styles in conflict. I suspect that Mississippi's probably had enough of the sort of backroom deal way of doing things, and they want the openness pro-growth that the Speaker and the House represent. But this is really the nub of the issue. This is why they're at loggerheads, and this is why they've failed to agree a budget.
Well, and, you know, just to make sure that we state this correctly, because I see a lot of people talking about, you know, you've been there for over 3 months now, and you wait to the last minute to do the budget. Now, true, first day of the session, you can't start the budget because there's going to be legislation passed and other things worked on that may change the financial figuring to some extent. So you can't start out of the gate with it, but you don't have to wait to the last minute every time.
Basically what happened is the Senate tried to do it all at the last minute, literally over a weekend, with cozy deals where they all the good old boys get in the room and they basically carve up your tax dollars, and it's all, you know, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. And I think Mississippi's had enough of that kind of politics. And I think the House made it clear they're not going to do that. This is serious money. This is $7 billion of your money, and we owe it to the taxpayers of Mississippi to do this properly. And the failure of the Senate to realize this, I think, reflects very badly on them. And I think quite rightly the House refused to play that game. So sadly, because of the Senate leadership, there is now going to have to be a special session. But quite rightly, the governor is going to call a special session, and this needs to be done, and it needs to be done properly, it needs to be done openly, and it needs to be done so that you, the taxpayer, can see what they're doing with your dollars.
Well, and that's, to me, one of the benefits of calling a special session for this and this situation, because, well, there's nothing else to mix it in with and hide behind. That's all they're doing when they come back.
Yep. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I really hope, and it would serve the leadership of the Senate quite right, if the governor, and I hope he does, I hope if the governor and his team are listening to this, they have the courage to put on the special session not just the budget, but all of those other pro-growth policies that the House proposed and the Senate leadership intentionally killed in committee, like school choice, like certificate of need reform, like the ballot initiative. All of these things that the House leadership intentionally killed in committee this session. Wouldn't it be lovely if they were put on the agenda for the special session and we could see them come out and explain to the voters, their primary voters in a few years' time, why it is that they don't want this pro-growth agenda? I think the Senate has in danger of shooting itself in the foot, but they brought this on themselves.
Well, and to me, this seems to me to be the atmosphere right now. If we've seen nothing else on the national level, on the state level, everything, for some reason, Republicans get control and then it falls apart because of intramural squabbling.
Well, it only falls apart, Dave, if it doesn't fall apart if all the Republicans unite behind a free market, conservative, liberty-orientated agenda. It does fall apart if some Republicans seem to govern more in common with what you might expect from sort of Nancy Pelosi. You're familiar with that wonderful American movie and book, The Wizard of Oz. It's a great classic. And the great premise of the movie is that, Dorothy and her friends are building up to that moment when they get to the Emerald City and they meet the great Oz. And I wonder if this session is a little bit like that. We've finally got to meet the great Oz, and you pull back the curtain and the great Oz is not this political wizard. It's rather confused senators not quite knowing where to put the decimal point. And I think we've had a Wizard of Oz moment in Mississippi politics, and I don't think it's ever going to be the same again. I think the credibility of some of these people has taken a catastrophic tumble.
Let me just say thank you for that. I'm going to spend the entire weekend trying to figure out who the flying monkeys are. That's where you took my brain, Douglas.
There are plenty of flying monkeys.
Oh, yeah, they're everywhere. There are swarms of them at this point, it feels like. How do we fix this moving forward? We've got the special session coming. Hopefully that'll solve some of this, but I hate to look this far down the road, but next session, how do we avoid the same thing happening again?
Sunlight. I think the Speaker has got to carry on with his new style. Remember, he brought about this radical transformation in our tax system, not by a backroom deal, but by having an open meeting in which he invited every Mississippian. I was there. There were more than 500 people turned up, and it was a fascinating conversation. It was a genuine discussion. I mean, there were people disagreeing openly, and out of that, Trey Lamar came up with a great plan. It was improved on. That's the style that needs to carry Mississippi forward, this openness and this, as the Speaker put it in his brilliant remarks yesterday, a willingness to rock the boat, not taking the status quo any longer. Because I think any Mississippian under the age of 40 is fed up with this good old boy system. And I think they want this openness and they want the pro-growth policies that the governor and the Speaker are now behind. So I think more of the same, more openness, more frankness, more candor. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I think the roadblock to reform in this process, I think, is going to learn, perhaps the hard way, that actually that style of politics belongs to a century that has now gone.
Well, and it is a different time. There are different circumstances. It's a different economy. Everything is different. Yeah. And it calls to mind the old chestnut that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
Yeah. And how can you expect to make a decision about $7 billion worth of taxpayer money with backroom deals at the last minute over the weekend? I mean, are you doing that because you think that's a sensible way of doing it? Are you doing it because the lobbyists want you to do it that way? Come on, that's no way to run a state government. And fortunately, we now have a special session that I think will allow us to do the budget properly. But I really hope, I repeat the point, I really hope that the governor adds onto the agenda for the special session some of the other issues that some people in the Senate intentionally blocked. Let them come out and openly say to voters in Mississippi, not, oh, this died in committee. Let them come out and say, we don't want you to have the ballot initiative. We don't want to deregulate the healthcare economy. Let them come out and say, we don't want you to have the school choice that every family in every one of the surrounding states around the borders of Mississippi now have. Let's have a special session that forces them to do that. I don't think they'll have the courage.
I was about to ask you, in your opinion, what do you think the odds are of that happening?
Better than they were 48 hours ago. I mean, I think the Senate has kind of slightly brought this on themselves. I think their obstinacy, their refusal to extend the rules, to avoid suspend the rules, to avoid a special session. I mean, I think it's been one blunder after another by the Senate in their own terms. I'm not just talking about not knowing how to do basic math. I mean, they've blundered and blundered again, and they've doubled down on their blunder. And if they're listening to this, they'll probably, like the Bourbons, forgive nothing and learn nothing. But, I think the rest of us want to see some of this pro-growth reform. So it would be lovely if that was included in the special session.
You're talking about the conference weekend, the session where they usually get together and slap the budget together at the last minute, as we've said. I think there's another factor in that. You talk about backroom deals and carving it up and everything. I think there's another factor that we have to consider, and that is they were trying to do it that way because they've always done it that way.
Yeah, and it probably suits some people to keep their cards very close to their chest, to be thought of as being frightfully important, to be wined and dined by the lobbyists, to only ever say things cryptically. I mean, it kind of feels good if you're a politician and you can do that, but it doesn't really serve the rest of us. The candor that we're getting from Jason White and from Trey Lamar and that new generation of state leaders is exactly what we need to fix some of these problems, not cryptic candor and backroom deals at the weekend. So I think there's a fundamental shift. Actually, all the frustrations in this session, I think this is a watershed session. I don't think politics in Mississippi is going to be what it was before after this session.
It's going to be interesting to see where it goes. We've got Douglas Carswell with the Mississippi Center for Public Policy in the studio. Can you stick around?
I'd love to.
I would love for you to. We'll continue the conversation with him right after this on Mornings on SuperTalk Mississippi. Keep it here. Welcome back. Mornings on SuperTalk Mississippi. Dave Hughes here. I want to remind you, Sports Talk Mississippi live at Scruggs Farm, Lawn, and Garden in Saltillo this afternoon for the Drive Green Spring Sales event. Deals on John Deere commercial mowers at 0% for 48 months and 0% up to 72 months on all compact tractors. Douglas Carswell with the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. I'm sure you've got some farming to do, so you could take advantage of that. But right now, though, we're concentrating our time on making sure we do the best job possible to lose you an invitation to any Senate luncheons. And I think we're accomplishing that so far, Douglas.
Well, one's not making the case for pro-growth policies because you want to be invited into the Senate. You're doing it because it's what Mississippi needs. We don't need to be 50th out of 50. I mean, if you look at the recent data showing per capita GDP growth in the last quarter of last year, Mississippi is the second fastest growing state in America. If we had a bit more pro-growth policies, we wouldn't be 50th out of 50 for very long.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. Yeah, on your X profile, X, Twitter, whatever we're calling it this week, your pinned post, you have something that you posted back in December showing those GDP numbers and showing that Mississippi is ahead of the United Kingdom.
Yep, Mississippi is not only in per capita GDP terms, that's the economic value per person in Mississippi. We've not just overtaken the UK, we're overtaking Germany this year. Mississippi will be a more prosperous place than Germany this year. But I measure it against other states in America. Mississippi shouldn't be, and we shouldn't put up with the idea that we have to be 50th out of 50. We're 50th out of 50 because we've had bad policy, and we change the bad policy and we get good pro-growth policy like we're seeing. We will grow. And I think this is when I first spotted the data 3 months ago, I wrote and tweeted about it, and various people said to me, no, this is nonsense. I'm delighted to see that the governor is now majoring on this idea that Mississippi is one of the fastest growing states in America, because it's not just him saying it, it's the data saying it. It's the truth. Now, it could just be a snapshot, but eventually a series of snapshots becomes a trend, and I think we're starting to see this trend now.
Well, and that to me is the problem, and it goes back to what we were talking about and the point I brought up, that conference weekend was expected to happen this time because that's the way we've always done it. Yeah. We have to get out of the mindset of, well, my mama and my grandmama did it this way, so it's good enough for me. We have to be willing to change things to get different results.
You're not going to get the growth that you want and the services that you want and the efficient government at Mississippi state level that you want if you make decisions about how to spend $7 billion of taxpayer money every year over the weekend with backroom deals. You're just not. And it's good to see that the House leadership gets this, which is why they wanted a proper budget process. But, there are a whole bunch of things. We talk about some of the successes of the session, and, abolishing the income tax is absolutely, it's game-changing, it's transformative. We're the first state, other states don't have the income tax, but we're the first state, apart from oil-rich Alaska, that had an income tax that passes legislation to get rid of it. That is something where Mississippi is leading. But imagine if we were to give every family in Mississippi control over their share of the education budget. Instead of leaving it to a backroom deal to allocate the education budget to the good old boys on this school board or that school board who will then spend it on some school superintendent who earns more than the state governor, why don't we give that money, as they do in other states, to every family? You would then see a transformation in standards. You would then see higher standards of math, both inside and outside the Senate. You would see a big improvement in the workforce readiness. These are things that are just waiting to be done. And what's so frustrating is the House keeps on coming up with these proposals. The deregulation of the healthcare economy that's holding healthcare back in Mississippi. The House, I mean, he has to be mentioned. Hank Zuber came up with this incredibly good bill, the sensible bill, and it would have improved healthcare for Mississippians at no extra cost to the taxpayer by removing some of these regulations. It was killed in the Senate. If only we could allow people like Hank Zuber and Trey Lamar and Jason White to do what needs to be done in terms of reform, we would see Mississippi overtake not just West Virginia, we'd be overtaking Arkansas and Alabama in due course too.
Well, the thing to remember is reform is hard until suddenly, literally overnight sometimes, it's not hard.
Yeah.
You have to build up to it, and then the dam breaks.
And the wonderful moment is when everyone's sitting around the table, when the governor's signing the bill, claiming credit for something that you know that they were opposing only a few weeks ago. But that is a wonderful moment. And, you know, frankly, that's what it's all about. Ronald Reagan said, if you're willing to let other people take the credit, there's no end to the good you can do in politics. And I think people like Jason White and Tate Reeves and Trey Lamar are living up to that. It's great to see that conservative leadership in the tradition of Reagan transforming our state.
Well, and I think that's the difference, because you know this is a bedrock precept of leadership. The leader messed up. The team did a great job. That's the way you always present it. Well, and we don't get that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, quite often I'll call out people in the legislature who I think aren't doing what a pro-growth conservative should do. So I think it's all the more important that we praise those who do the right thing. And there are lots of brave people in the House and the Senate who've been prepared to do the right thing. So we're later on going to be giving out the Mississippi Freedom Awards, where we acknowledge some of the efforts made. And some of them are unsuccessful efforts. You know, we all know that Jason White and Trey Lamar succeeded with their tax reform. But there are things that, you know, Hank Zuber and Sam Creekmore tried to do that didn't quite make it over the line. Jensen Owen on school choice. I think these people need to be acknowledged as the heroes. And I think your listeners need to understand that these are good conservatives on their side. These are people who stand out head and shoulders in the legislature as being genuine, the real deal, the real principled, liberty-minded conservatives.
To me, that's when principles really come forward. When you take on what on the face of it is a losing cause, you know there are going to be problems, you know there's going to be resistance, but you do it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see it through no matter what. And surprisingly often, if you're prepared to do that, you get a win.
Sometimes by accident. Most of the time it surprises you. You're like, wait, this is working? What?
Someone puts the decimal point in the wrong place when they try to pass a motion to snooker your proposal. Yeah, it can happen.
Yeah, but what are the odds of that happening, right?
We'll take the win. We'll take the win. We'll take the win.
Let me ask you a question on that, though. If that typo hadn't happened, would we have passed that legislation?
Let's be absolutely clear about this. What the Senate was trying to do was to create a trigger that they intended to never be pulled. That would allow them to say, look, we passed a bill to eliminate the income tax, knowing that because of their appetite for spending your tax dollars, there would never come the opportunity to actually pull that trigger. Weirdly, to mix my metaphors, the trigger they pulled actually shot themselves in the foot, but, you know, we'll take the win.
Definitely. And I'm just wondering, though, if they hadn't had that typo and it had been 85% instead of 0.85%, would the House have passed it, approved it?
Well, I think that would have made things very, very difficult for the House, because they could have accepted it knowing that the trigger was never going to be pulled, that we would have income tax elimination in theory but never in practice. Or would they refuse to do it? And this is the clash of the two styles of politics. One of them is frank and open and honest and says what it wants, and it is up against this clever sophistry, this clever style of politics that kills things in committee, kills things in the shadows, never quite says what it means, says it's going to support school choice, says it's going to support a ballot initiative, but somehow kills both of those proposals in committee. This is why I think it was fortuitous that they put the decimal point in the wrong place. But ultimately, maybe backroom deal politics is bad because it doesn't involve a team. And maybe if you had a team, you would have spotted that typo.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I'm going to give you your out right here because we're coming up on the break. If you want to hang around for the next segment, you want to take a run at tariffs?
I would love to. If you can't find a proper guest, I would love to stay on.
Oh, no, you are the most proper of guests, my friend. Douglas Carswell, the president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. I was just giving you an out in case you wanted to say, oh, no, I've got an appointment, Dave. I don't want to talk about tariffs. I'm going to go.
I've got to go see my friends in the Senate.
Yes. You have a breakfast scheduled, I'm sure. Yeah,
I think it's a punctuation working lunch.
I hope not. I hope it worked well this time.
I kid.
Let's leave the punctuation where it's at the moment. We will continue final segment of the 7 o'clock hour with our friend Douglas Carswell when we return on Mornings on SuperTalk Mississippi. Keep it here. Okay, I set you up in advance. Tariffs. There seems to be an unhealthy amount of fear-mongering in my mind anyway about the tariff plan unveiled by President Trump. What are your thoughts on all of this?
I'll be honest, Dave, I don't think tariffs are a good idea, and let me explain why. It's one of those things that sounds superficially very attractive. Look, we've got all these imports, we've got these trade deficits, let's put in tariffs and it'll be fine and dandy. It won't be fine and dandy. Everyone listening, I pretty much guarantee, has got a smartphone. That smartphone that you've got is not made uniquely in one place. It is probably designed in California. It probably uses chips from Taiwan, probably uses plastic that was extracted from maybe the Gulf of America or wherever. It is a product of a very complex global supply chain. If you put a 30% tariff on imports from Taiwan, your cell phone, your smartphone, when you go to get a new smartphone, you go to C Spire and you ask for a new smartphone. I guarantee if tariffs come in, you will be paying a lot more for your smartphone in 12 months' time than you are today. It's not great to impose tariffs. The danger is you then get reciprocal tariffs, and China announced today they're going to put a 34% tariff on America. So imagine that you are an American worker who works for Boeing. Kiss goodbye to the idea that Boeing is going to sell any more products to China. You're going to allow the European Airbus consortium to clean up the market. This is not good news for America. It's not good news for consumers. It's not good news for the world. And it pains me to say that because I'm a big supporter of so much else that this government is doing.
Well, my take on this, and we've seen this play out already a couple of times, how much of this is the intention of allowing these tariffs to go through and stay in place, and how much of it is a bargaining chip by President Trump to get people to come and negotiate the tariffs that other countries are charging on our goods?
I hope it's that, but I'm not going to justify and rationalize something that I know to be bad on the hope that that's the case. I hope that's the case. Let me tell you what I think might be the best case scenario from here. The tariffs come in, already I think you're going to see a downturn in the stock market. You're going to probably see a downturn, maybe even a recession coming in America. That may have happened anyway, even without the tariffs. I hope that in the next few weeks, the UK and the US announced a free trade agreement. So the UK got a very low tariff rate, only 10%. We were the most favoured status of anyone. Unlike the Europeans who got 20% or the Japanese who got 24%, we only got 10%. I hope that a free trade agreement goes ahead in the next few weeks. That means that it's 0-0. The UK doesn't put any restrictions on American goods. That means the American market automatically gets 20% bigger, and we have complete free trade. And I hope that a US-UK free trade agreement in the next few weeks then becomes the model that other countries. And Trump is right. There are all sorts of restrictions. Japan may sell us lots of stuff, but it's pretty difficult for people in America to sell stuff to Japan. There are all sorts of non-tariff barriers. And I think maybe if any good can come out of this, it will be to force those countries to remove those restrictions. But it needs a country like the UK to show, and it's really good that the UK government is not putting retaliatory tariffs on the US. The UK government's response is actually, we're going to get rid of all tariffs completely. That was the response of the Israeli government. That is the way forward. Eliminate tariffs if you're a non-American country on American goods, and negotiate with Trump and say, look, if we get rid of all restrictions, tariffs and non-tariffs, on your products, will you give us a free trade agreement? And I think that could actually be something good that comes out of this. But if we keep up with the tariffs that we saw the other day, your living standard is going to fall, my living standard will fall, people will go to Walmart and their dollars will simply not buy what they can buy today.
See, this is why I wanted to ask your take. I knew you'd have one, and you did not disappoint, my friend, as usual. Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. The Senate parliamentarian is on line 2 for you before you get out of the studio. I think maybe a question. I don't know. Douglas, always enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much. It's been great. I love it. Thank you.
Coming up next, we've got news from Fox News and SuperTalk Mississippi News. This hour of Mornings with Richard Cross brought to you by MWG Employer Services. Call 601-206-7966 or go to MWGEmployerServices.com to find out more. Up next after news, Nicole Smith with the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science. Keep it here.